So they had some a pretty interesting suite of things to read and watch. Um, and even before this class was designed, I've read those things, I've seen those videos. I don't, the students probably don't know this, but one of the things I do in my line of work is something called faculty development. And I run an activity that's very similar to the privilege walk. In fact, it's based on the privilege walk, but I do it in a way where it's not based on your own life. And we could kind of talk about that later. But I guess I'm just making the point that I'm very intimately familiar with the process and conversations around white privilege and how mostly grown-ups, because that's who I work with. Okay, I shouldn't say grown-ups, I mean faculty members, um, and how they respond to those conversations. So it was interesting reading how the students both responded to it themselves, but the people that they chose to speak to. Maybe Victoria, what we can start with is maybe just some reflections on your own association with the term, maybe the activity, if you've ever been a part of it, or general conversations you've had around the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place to start. Thank you. So I I hadn't really heard of any of these terms until I got to college.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in a predominantly Black and Puerto Rican neighborhood. And as a Latina, that was all I knew. Like, I didn't really understand what it was like to be a minority, because
Mm-hmm.
we were the majority where I grew up and where I was. When I got to high school, I was one of the few students of color there, and it was such a shock to me. I was like, wait, we're not the majority? Like, what do you mean? And what do you mean I'm the odd one out? This doesn't make sense. Because my only experience of being the odd one out was that I'm not Puerto Rican and I'm not Black and I'm not Mexican. So people are like, well, what are you? Like, how can you be a Latinx if you're not one of those? There's the big common ones.
You're like,
Um,
Guatemala's a
but,
country, in
huh?
case, you're like, Guatemala's a country too, in case you didn't get the email,
Yeah,
right?
so many people say, oh, isn't that in Mexico though? No, it's not. So that was my only experience of being the odd one out, but going to high school and being surrounded by people who didn't look like me and who hadn't experienced the same things that I had, and where I lived was the South Side, even though it wasn't even the South Side, and so there was a bad rep. Um,
Chicago,
my
right?
neighborhood, yeah, in Chicago, um, my neighborhood and like what people like me did or whatever that was. But I never had a term for all of that stuff. I thought it was just, damn, these kids suck. Like, I thought middle school was hard because kids are mean, but no, high school is worse. And then when I got to college, and because I went to Brown, it being such a liberal school where all of these terms they're what we talked about every single day, and finally having a term for it and having a term to my own biases, because for the longest time I was like, oh no, like Black and brown folks, like we have the same struggle, like it's the same, we are equally oppressed. I know the struggle just as much as they do, and we can relate on all levels. And learning more about that, and how even I, as a person of color, am incredibly privileged because I'm not Black and because I am lighter skinned, and all of these things, it was it was jarring and shocking, but it was so good to finally be able to know what it was that I experienced and what it was that I had to improve on. And so, fast forward a little bit, when I was TAing, we started having TA training for our computer science TAs, specifically around diversity and inclusion, and having TAs talk about that, because like any STEM field, the computer science department was very homogenous, and those of us who did not fit in were really struggling because of the attitudes of students and faculty members. So we started doing these trainings, and we had, I ended up doing the privilege walk throughout college at least twice a year, or something similar. We did an activity too, in a class I took where we had a bag of M&Ms and we either dumped the M&Ms into a cup or took them out based on whether the statements apply to us or not. And I personally found that one so much more powerful than the walk, because I didn't feel some type of way when I saw someone step over the line and I had to step back. Instead, it was more of an anonymous thing where I just heard a lot of M&Ms fall into cups and I was taking M&Ms out of my cup. And so that was a really powerful experience because I didn't have any associations with anyone in particular, but I could hear it. And it was just having all of these things. And as I have grown and learned and, you know, socioeconomically, my status has changed, right? I grew up under the poverty line and I am solidly middle class now. And doing those privilege walks or similar activities every year and seeing how I am slowly gaining more and more privilege because of my level of education, because of my financial status, because of, you know, becoming more comfortable with English as a queer person, like because I'm in a heterosexual relationship, and that has changed throughout. So that has all been really interesting, just thinking about how our privilege can change all the time, constantly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess like you, I had a you know, a windy path, right? I was born and raised in the Caribbean. I came to America when I was 19, and so not only was the term new for me, just the whole concept of race relations in America, in terms of a lived experience, really only began for me in 1999. And I went to a historically black college, so at least on campus, um, you know, it was decidedly monolithic. It was in Atlanta, so once you left campus, and especially if you left, you know, just not just leave campus but leave Atlanta, then you know things are different, right? So I would say from 19 years of age um, to grad school, there was a steep learning curve. I There was nothing written in a book. I just had to kind of figure out what it meant to be black and male in America. You know, I'm here today and I'm fine, right? But I certainly had some experiences that weren't pleasant, that I, at least at the time, I didn't have a language for, and perhaps didn't understand why they were taking place, right? And we can spend all day on this podcast if I detailed every one of them to you. But I'm happy to share. I wrote about a few of them in some chapters that I've written, and I'm happy to share that with the students if they're interested. Um, and you know, I've honestly, you maybe, to be fully honest with you, maybe struggled with the term white privilege a little bit over the last, say, 6, 7 years of my scholarship and research and things, because of the maybe different contexts it's used and ways I choose to use it or not use it. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. When I read Peggy McIntosh's essay, and I've read it many, many times now, it reads more like a reflection, right? It reads like somebody who's come to terms with somebody that they had not really thought of until a certain critical point. And they are sharing that reflection with the world in the hope that the substance of that reflection provides meaning and language and verbiage for other people who may be struggling to articulate something in their own mind, right? And what I think has happened since that point, perhaps unintentionally, is that the term white privilege ends up being used in a little bit of a demonizing context. Mm. And I don't think it's always people just, I hate white people. I don't think that's the point. But it ends up being this thing where, you know, you say privilege and people almost start feeling like, well, it's bad to have it. Like I'm a bad person because I have privilege. When really that wasn't the point of it, right? It was more of an exploration of how the accretion of privilege has come to be, and interrogating that process a bit more meaningfully. So even the privilege walk, which I've taken a part, I've been a part of, you know, you mentioned about the feelings you have about seeing somebody step over the line. And I know people who, I think regardless of where they end up in that walk, whether they end up in the front or the back, it leaves them upset because, okay, first of all, I'm not trying to put my business out there on the street. Like I just met you. You're gonna sit up here and ask me to walk back and walk like and so I didn't wasn't trying to tell the whole world I came from this wealthy family or, tell the whole world I came from a place with gun violence and things like that. And so what happens I fear is that the strong emotion it elicits then shuts down opportunities that we have after that to engage in conversations about the process that leads to the accretion of the privilege. And if that learning opportunity is lost, then if the goal here is for us to kind of lock arms and move forward and be, meaningful actors on this issue, then I worry that we lose that opportunity if the emotion just overwhelms the experience. So what I have done, colleagues and I use a process we call chance at birth, where those same list of privileges, right, instead of just reading it off a sheet and have people walk back and forth, um, we actually have them underline on an anonymous sheet the privilege statements that apply to their lives, right? So they spend like 5, 10 minutes and they just underline, 25, 30 of those things. Then we have them exchange those sheets 6 times. So they go around the room and they just give the sheet to a new person every time. So if they do that, at the end of the exchange, everybody in the room has a sheet, but they don't know who the sheet came from because it kept like going from person to person. Then I have them do the walk. So what ends up happening is the pattern of the walk is the same as it would be if I had done it, without the sheet because it's from people within the room. But now it's anonymous, right? So now nobody knows what your like station in life is, right? But you're seeing from the pattern of the walk that at least within this room, there are people who come from different life backgrounds. And so now that perhaps lowers the temperature a little bit on the shaming piece of it and allows us to kind of have a discussion about, what the different constructs mean, how to reflect on it and things like that. And, I think some of this came up in some of the beautiful applications that I've read. And I just want to really commend everybody for the time and attention they paid to really taking this assignment seriously, because I know some of you probably wasn't easy. There was a couple who talked about um, bringing this up with others and their own defensiveness, right? Somebody, I think one student said, the person looked them in the eye and said, "There's no such thing." And I read that and I'm thinking to myself, maybe it's because I'm the eternal optimist, right? I know where that's coming from, right? I know where that denial is coming from, and I know why hearing the term white privilege, depending on your status in life as a white identified individual, why that might trigger a feeling of you being attacked. And if that feeling is triggered, then your response is to sort of kind of lash out a little bit or go into defense mode. And this is why one of many reasons why I think this course we offering here is important, is to help you, the future leaders of America, to kind of navigate the complex emotions that comes from reading these kinds of texts, in the hope that when you have discussions with others, it is one where you recognize it will be emotional, but you can still navigate it intellectually, right? Did you have any thoughts on some of the applications you read?
Yeah, I mean, so before we started recording, we were talking about, I shout out to all the students shout out to all of you, really, but folks who went out there and put themselves out there and had interviews with other people. I am honestly surprised at the number of interviews we've had, because I've had these type of assignments for 2 years now, and very few students do interviews, because of the uncomfort of, even when it's not topics that are these topics that can lead to such tense emotions or strong emotions and tense conversations, students tend to steer away from doing interviews. And seeing so many of you do interviews and being comfortable with being so open and honest in your conversations, and the way that you ask the questions, and being respectful and mindful of your own positionality, and understanding that, folks who are white, right? And then they recognize I'm not a person of color, so I don't know how I can speak on this, but these are the conversations that I had. It's so encouraging and refreshing to see that, because I was telling Brian, like, even I, who have, as a person of color, as someone who has been trying to learn and unlearn for so long now, and doing the research and doing all of these readings, I still struggle with being comfortable having the conversations, because what if I say something wrong? I know that I haven't unlearned all the problematic things yet, and what if I haven't figured out that they're problematic yet, and then I say something and there's pain in that unlearning to do, realizing, oh man, I messed up because of XYZ, and I need to do some more deeper reflection and analyze like where this is coming from and why I have those feelings or associations, so that I can unlearn them and then learn the right ones. I was just so happy, so impressed, and just it's so exciting to see that you're all so comfortable having these conversations, and even in your reflections afterwards, right? Like talking about who you are and like what the identities that you hold, and where those fit into these larger conversations. So I'm just so grateful to all of you for being so open and candid and honest, and doing, because this is hard work, right? Like, sure, maybe it was a couple readings and a couple videos and you spent like an hour doing that, but doing that inner work, that's the hard stuff. And I am so grateful that you're all putting so much thought and effort into it and sharing that with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the applications, maybe a couple of them said that this was the first time I've even heard these terms. Which, depending on where you were raised, what schools you went to, the communities you grew up in, I'm not entirely surprised, right? So one of the things I've come to learn about the American experience is it definitely is a different experience depending on where you are. And the stories that are told about how we've come to be in this moment um, differs depending on who's telling the story and what textbooks are chosen, and what politics are being manifested in the context and things like that. So being human in STEM is I guess, well, not I guess, I mean, it's our admission that our humanity doesn't cease simply because we are computer science majors, biology majors, chemistry majors. And the constructs that come up in these conversations apply every much in our classroom, in our profession, in our hiring practices, in you look around and see the demographics of who's in the room. It applies there every much there as it does in, Black Lives Matter protests or the voting booth or things like that, right? So, I'm excited that we have the opportunity to introduce you all to these things and have these conversations. And I urge you, and this kind of ties back to what you were just saying, Rebecca, is to be prepared to wrestle. I mean, I'm not saying this as a negative thing. I'm saying this as when you come up on these terms, perhaps for the first time, or you start, your radar starts getting sharpened and you're looking at the world around you anew because of these things that are being elucidated. I think it inevitably ushers in just a little bit of darkness that you didn't know, you shouldn't have been saying that, or your approach certain situations wasn't the best way. And you will have to kind of sit with that for a while, but knowing the process, right? That this is not so much a road to Damascus moment, in the sense that you just kind of see the light and then the next day everything's fine and you'll never make a mistake ever again. It's very much a process. So even, Victoria and I, who've been doing this work, for our entire professional lives, we could both point to times where we messed up and said something offensive and, or weren't as steeped on certain aspects of equity issues as we should be, right? So it part of it is a little bit of a commitment to ongoing learning, right? So as you read an article, you'll have questions. And you'll need to read other articles to get some more context on that article. And then you need to read other articles, you need to read other books and see other podcasts, and you have more and more and more questions. But that's a good thing, because it's never you'll take the being human in STEM class and then now you're done, right? I think what we hope to do is really prepare you for what we hope is a lifelong journey, and your application seems to suggest that you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Lifelong learning, like it's real. It is so real. I mean, and even with the reading this week, right? I found myself with the sections on Eurocentric sciences and indigenous knowledge. I understood because grew up in a Eurocentric system, and culturally, a lot of our traditional, our cultural knowledge is there's still threads of indigenous knowledge in there. And then when I got to Japanese knowledge, I had such a hard time, and I realized there are so many parts of the world, so many people, so many experiences that I haven't educated myself on, and that I need to, because we're, I should know these things. um and it was jarring, because I was like, man, if I had learned more about this, I wouldn't be having such a hard time with this article right now. But also, damn, I have a lot of learning to do. Like, it's not just the unlearning now. There's just a whole set of, it opened a whole, there was a dam that got like blown up, and I was like, man, all of that is coming in. Like, I need to do so much learning about so many things.
Right. So, I mean, I know a lot of the readings were kind of centered around white privilege. Um, but would you share perhaps if there's kind of other forms of hierarchical privileges that might run a similar gamut, right? So like you raised earlier about being queer in a heterosexual relationship, and so there is likely um, heterosexual privilege. In fact, it's not likely there is, right? And are there lessons from understanding white privilege that can be brought to bear to understanding other forms of privilege that perhaps you don't always think about? So just we think of a lot of these things as black white binary type of thing, but as we know, there are so many other isms. There's male privilege, and so do you want to comment on any other types of privilege that perhaps these readings and these lessons should tune us into?
Yeah, I think thinking about folks who grew up here, even so, if whether you immigrated here at an early age or whether you're born and raised here, growing up understanding the culture here, and what's acceptable and what is not, speaking English either fluently but especially as a first language, and being able to communicate your ideas and feelings in the language that is the predominant language. Even if you travel, so many other people will speak English, right? Like, you'll never be at a loss regardless of where you go, because English is the dominant language. And that's not true for any other language. Like, you're not gonna, if there's no guarantee that if you speak another language, you'll be fine anywhere else except English. And so we all, as English speakers, have such a huge privilege there. And there are things like little things, right? Like being right-handed versus left-handed, right? So many of the things that we use every day are exclusively designed really for right-handed people. And if you're not left-handed, you don't recognize that. So there are tons of things, going from like the small things to very large parts of our identity, that there are just privileges that we have every single day that we fail to recognize and see, because it's like, oh, well, it's just the way it is. Like, it's always worked out for me. It's fine. So
It's interesting you raise up the handedness thing, because I am left-handed, and I always think about it every time I check out somewhere. I know you have the, like, you sign the screen or whatever, but it always oriented in such a way that it's easy if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, you have to kind of do this awkward thing. I didn't know it's a small thing, right? But it's interesting just how that becomes the default. But it's a good lesson.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I was really, again, I just want to reiterate how proud I was to read the reflections. I'll obviously, we both gave some personal feedback, but looking forward to kind of sharing some more thoughts next week. In the meantime, hope everybody can stay corona free. Right?
Yes, very important. Stay corona free, stay safe, stay healthy, and feel free to email us if you need anything, if you want to have a chat. We are more than happy to talk to all of you. So thank you all so much, and you will see us again next week, and we'll continue to interact via Brightspace.
Take care.